Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast for film fans by film fans. Every episode we look at films old and new to choose what should be preserved for all time in our movie vault. With lively topics, big questions and crazy challenges to entertain us and our guests, we always look to have fun by giving you the topics worth discussing and the movies worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. But don't just take my word for it, here's a preview of what to expect in today's episode.
This is why I am issuing you a challenge here, Steph and I, publicly on this podcast. So hopefully you're listening.
And maybe Dan and Joe, because they also were like,
oh, and Dan,
yes.
Dan and Joe, because also you are suck-ups and you also need to be dealt with. I'm challenging you all. If you object to the removal of coming out of the movie vault, this is what is happening.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? I am your father. Wait! Got you! Here's Johnny. I'll be back.
It's not the car, it's a silly movie.
Well, good movies.
Hello, we're back for our first episode of 2022. Happy New Year to all of our listeners. And this is actually our first in-person recording that we've done in about nearly 2 years due to the pandemic. So very special episode today. We're actually in our new recording space as well. So we're going to be talking all about that. How it's been for the last 2.5 years, picking some favorite movies throughout it, and also going through the movie vault, which we think is in dire need of a sort of catch up and a refresh. So I am your host, David Osger, and I am of course joined by my fellow co-host, Craig MacDonald. Hello, Craig.
I can touch your face.
I was tempted to use the Voldemort, like, I can touch you now.
I mean, all you're doing is encouraging me.
Yeah, I'm not pinned up against like a grave like in that.
All right, don't
film.
depict our relationship more than it actually is.
Just a bunch of Death Eaters surrounding us. So, Craig, yeah, how is it being back?
I mean, it's weird I can touch your face. It's also just weird for the first time in ages, and I think listeners might also find this a bit disconcerting as well. The clarity of my voice due to having access to this technology again is quite worrying, and I don't like my voice.
Well, also, I suppose we're in kind of cold flu season and, you know, lots of bugs and stuff going around. So a lot of people are a bit more like hoarse and stuff at the moment as well. So that might change things. I've noticed myself when I've been recording things recently, I'm like, I sound a lot more gruff because of like having a cough and that kind of thing.
Oh, I've just been aged 20 years by this entire process.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that Spider-Man animated episode where Peter Parker is aged horribly by...
And just the Vulture is just the years that have been 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, exactly. So we're also here in our new setup. So we have previously been obviously recording digitally from our own homes during the pandemic. And before that, we had a very cool recording studio that we had access to. So now we're here in our new location, which we've teased before, I believe, in our Endgame special, etc. So, Craig, how does it feel to be in our new space?
You say new space, this is basically just your new flat. No, it's nice and intimate. Obviously, I'm intrigued to see how we get more people in here, but I am glad that you've added a gong to this place. I think that's quite prestigious. Hey, listeners, this is the gong. Look at that beauty go.
It's like the opening of those classic movies where it's like a man like hitting the gong. That's how we'll start.
What I like about this is it means that, you know, all those times over Zoom I had to private message you being like, move on, get this guy to shut up. What the is going on? Sorry, swearing. Actually, no, I don't care. Fuck it. Now I can just like slam the gong and just be like, oh, look at that. We need to move on, don't we? Oh, look at that.
Damn it. Yeah, so, you know, the great thing about this is like you said, where I have moved, I have specifically looked for somewhere where I could have recording space, you know, office space. So it's very much in the forefront to make sure that this room was set up to podcast in here. We got some, you know, nice soundproofing. We got the mics all set up again, which we haven't used properly in over, you know, 2 years. And yeah, we get to enjoy having in-person recordings again. So it'd be nice to get guests coming back, which are obviously like based locally, but we'll still be using over the internet or interviews to make sure that we can still get guests from around the country, different countries, America, different places in the UK. So, but it just means, like you said, that better intimacy, and also us two can always be there so people can see us together, even when we are doing those digital interviews, etc.
Yeah, especially considering that over the last couple of years, as much as things have gone badly in a lot of places, the entire thing that it has allowed for us is that there's been a lot more stability when it comes to internet interactions for recording the podcast. I remember the first ever time we tried to, have a guest on virtually. The tech was not in place to realistically be nice to us. Not to name any names, but, Skype.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Where Zoom has just been, good.
Yeah, I was thinking that actually, like thinking back to like that first digital recording we had to do, I was like, how far we've come since those days. But yeah, I guess like people have said with things like the cinema, there's something about that in-person experience, but also digital stuff has allowed us to explore new avenues. Like I think with the Endgame specials, etc. We were trying to think of like, how are we going to do this when we were still doing in-person recording? Whereas in a way, the digital stuff actually made it easier so that we could have like 8 people on a recording session at the same time without sort of cramming loads of people in one room and sharing mics and all that kind of stuff.
You say that, we were looking at getting an actual sort of TV studio for
yeah,
and that would have been great.
Oh yeah, that's what I mean. But we were thinking about the logistics of that when we were doing in person. But then when it came to the digital side, we were like, oh, okay, this is how we now do this in this way. So, in the future, we know that there can be that hybrid version of ways we do things, which has sort of opened our eyes to that. For everyone at home, this is very much like a bonus episode as we go into the new year, in which it gives us a chance to catch up with you guys, just, listen to me and Craig for once in terms of, our banter and our, disagreements and arguments. You can sort of catch up with us in terms of things that we've been watching or some of the thoughts we've had on the podcast for the past year or so. But also we thought that it was a good chance to catch up on the movie vault. So ever since we have, launched As Well Good Movies, we've had our vault of movies, which is located down in the film god's well. And we have been popping movies into there, which we think deserve to be remembered for all time, which are the, cream of the crop of what we've discussed. But we've added so much over this last 2.5 years, we felt that we kind of needed to remind ourselves about what's in there and also just kind of refine and make the definitive list. So going into this year now, where we got some exciting new announcements, we can kind of say, right, this is the movie vault going into 2022. And we can kind of, remind audiences of what's in there so people can say, right, well, I want to see you discuss this, or why hasn't that gone in there already? Or I'm happy that this is in here. So it'll be a nice chance of reflection in that way. So Craig, my big question for you, first of all, how do you feel after the 50 episodes, the main episodes, and all that time we had as Film Talk before that, and having recorded for just over 2 years, having done this, entire project?
I think it's mad the amount of scope that we've been able to get. Because obviously we try and focus on, the topics worth discussing. Just the fact that we've been able to get through so many vast topics, I think is actually quite impressive. Especially considering, I think when this, the entire thing originally started, it was very much a sort of fan's perspective. And that generally means certain types of films don't really get discussed because they're not the public consciousness to a great degree. So it's actually been quite nice doing some of the sort of niche areas. And granted, a lot of this year has just been used to punish me. So when a later question comes up, it's going to be a bit of a difficult one. I think the entire thing itself has been quite good. Getting up to the 50 episodes, I think there are areas where it was definitely a slog just because of the types of things that people wanted us to talk about. And it's just, you are sadistic people. But generally, I'm very proud of what we've done and everything we got through. Obviously, haven't had much chance to sort of reflect on a lot of things after the sort of the 50th and the Endgame special, because lots of things happened in life, so we haven't really done all that much since then. So I think it's actually quite good that we've had that sort of space to sort of just look at things and just, look at what's coming ahead.
Yeah, because I think, it is worth people knowing at home. It's similar to how people, I think, have operated in real life, isn't it? That we've kind of got used to this way of operating for the past sort of year and a half or more with the pandemic, and then as we saw come out to that, and then so new challenges arise. That's what we've definitely found within the past few months. So whereas it's given us that chance to be like, we want to do our 50th episode, we want to have this big celebration, we wanted to do that long planned Bond episode, we wanted to do a Champion of Champions for the Endgame specials. So I think that I'm glad that we've sort of managed to get all of those out there. But for anyone who's like, noticed that maybe our episode count has sort of dropped, or we've had some stuff pop up a bit later, then, a lot has changed. As you said, we're now in this recording space. We're in, this new location because I've started a new job, and there's been lots of different things changing in terms of like dates and availability and getting used to new work schedules. So, the start of the pandemic to now, things really have changed. And I think that that's where now I can look back on it and really go, wow, how things have changed since we first started, how we've got this big group of people which like help us out and come on the podcast, which we love speaking to them, catching up with them. I think a great example of that was something like our last episode with the Boxing Day episode, the fact that certain things happen in terms of availability and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, hey, Di, do you want to join us on this Boxing Day episode? And, he's there the next day. It's great that we've got, that group of people that, love talking about movies in the same way that we do, and also enjoy, the challenges and crazy stuff we throw at them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, let's face it, we have expanded our network to a bunch of insane people. Genuinely insane.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's my biggest takeaway is definitely, like I said, I'm very proud of all the work that, these guys have been able to give us, and just the friendships that we've formed with, all of our guests, and, like lifelong friendships in a lot of ways, like ways that outside of the podcast, different projects that have been going on, it's expanded into lots of different ways in terms of like people launching their own podcast. Stan and Joe we've spoken to a lot. We speak about how they launched their podcast by speaking to us, etc. I've been able to get involved in things like Capes, Cows and Masks. You've guested on that show as well.
Subtle plug.
Yeah. But then also we've got things like social media, Twitter. There's all these people out there, and it's great to then sometimes, like reach out and be like, oh yeah, I've seen you you do a podcast. We also do this podcast. So there's still plenty of room to still get ourselves out there. And I think that's what's great about this time now of the year, is that we're able to sort of level up in terms of, our reach and hopefully the stuff we can do. So we'll be talking a lot about that as we go along. But in terms of how this year's, the past year has gone, looking back at 2021, Craig, what was your favorite film that we watched or talked about on the podcast? Because as you said, you did have a few struggles and challenges throughout 2021.
It was worse than that. Half the films that we were given were specifically to piss me off in some capacity. Right, let's look at some of the things that we did have to talk about. We had to talk about the 50 Shades franchise. We ended up talking about, like James Bond. I've made it very clear I'm not a fan of those films. I understand that people are fans of them. I understand that it was a momentous occasion that we had to, cover. I'm just not a fan of those films. And then Pudsey the dog, the movie you made me go through. Like, what the hell? Why is that ever a thing that we'd ever have to talk about in this podcast? And that was like the majority of this year. And then if it wasn't that, it was just films that people were hyping up. Oh, Craig, you'll enjoy this. And no, I didn't. Right, Van Helsing, I did not enjoy. I'm sorry, guys. I did not enjoy that film. To me, that film was like an absolute weird crock of shite. And I'm just not dealing with it. So when you asked me then to go through this, and then also just, if it wasn't that, it was then episodes where the films that we liked, that we were discussing, I'd already seen. So in terms of actual genuine sort of surprises, there was nothing there. Thankfully, there was one episode, a grand one episode that provided to me a film I had not seen, probably did mean to see, and, I'm glad I've now seen it, enjoyed it, which is Little Miss Sunshine. Like, that was a genuinely pleasant experience, even though, it covered some weird aspects of familial relationships. But I did genuinely love that film. The fact that it's a lot of people with their own twisted issues coming together to basically help facilitate and make one little girl in that family happy. And it was charming, genuinely charming.
Yeah, and it was a great example of, as we said, those deep dives into films that wouldn't necessarily always get covered when you got your big franchise stuff. And it was nice to focus just purely on that episode, so you could focus on the individual performances, the different aspects of the story, the different themes that come about from it. So yeah, it was a great, deep dive into that film. That was definitely one that stood out when I was sort of looking back at the list. And yeah, I think because we've had those Endgame specials, there's been a lot of times that we have been challenged to watch certain things, or just franchises have had new reboots coming out, but their original versions are not great, etc. So a lot of your Mortal Kombats or those kind of weird versus films that we looked at. But definitely for me, I think, like you said, there was some stuff that I had seen before, but revisiting actually made me look at them in a new way. So something like Casino Royale with the James Bond franchise, for myself, I've always kind of been here and there with the franchise. I've sort of loved or enjoyed the Daniel Craig stuff, but I've never been one that sort of deep dived into the older films. And I think to come away from that, I could really appreciate Casino Royale's the way that it rebooted the series and also paid homage to James Bond's legacy as well. So I forgot how much of a nice balance that film strikes in terms of like its charm, its action, how great the visuals are, how great Daniel Craig's performance is in that. So yeah, I kind of remembered that as more like, oh, it's just the gritty Bond film where they play cards. But I was like, oh, actually, no, there's like loads to really like enjoy and love about this. So that was a great one to sort of revisit for me.
It is a surprising film in terms of how actually changing it is in terms of a franchise like James Bond. So yeah, like Casino Royale is the one Bond film that I genuinely really like.
Yeah, and I think for ones that I had never seen before, then, and this, again, is very much based on our viewing experience, and this one was just something I'd never seen before, didn't know what to expect, but I do have to give credit to Excalibur because it was just so bonkers and weird. I did have to give it credit because even though, again, we had things like our Versus movies and Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory and Mortal Kombat, there was a lot of ones that were kind of like old school films or had like a lot of like legacy or crazy dark moments, etc. But Excalibur was one which it's not in like the pop culture sphere, so I just never seen anything about it really. So I just went in blind, and there was just all these crazy things with Helen Mirren and Liam Neeson, etc., and weird accents, crazy flashy costumes. And I was like, I just have to respect the kind of vibes of this movie and just how much it crams in. And I think that was very much solidified by our conversation with Di and Matt as well. So it was a great deep dive into the history and mythology of King Arthur, which is a big reason that we did that episode.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely will say that film was insane and it was great watching it. Just would I consider it like the not masterpiece, but the film I look back on and go, yeah, I'm glad I watched it. It just came out just like, that was a weird trip. I'm unsure if I enjoyed this or not.
That's probably why it stood out to me. So in terms of like an enjoyable, a favorite experience, like I said, not one that was like, oh yeah, this is one of my favorite films of all time, etc. But it is one that kind of I just look back fondly thinking I wouldn't have watched that if it wasn't for this podcast.
Yeah, sure.
Which is, I had a fun time with it. It was a fun deep dive, which, hopefully we'll get some more of those crazy films leveled with your kind of your Little Miss Sunshines throughout. So going into then actually the films that were released in 2021. So often we do talk about like older movies, or if we're talking about certain films from say a year ago, 5 years ago, 30 years ago, sometimes it's because a new version of that film is coming out or there's a new entry in the franchise. So we've talked, especially this year, sometimes about the return of cinema. This time last year, actually, our episode was coming out talking about how the pandemic had affected cinemas and that kind of return, what we expected to see in the year up ahead. So probably would be quite interested to revisit that now when we were talking about it with Dan and Joe. But throughout the year, we've kind of like dropped in moments of like, oh, we've gone to the cinema, we've been able to go, things are coming out. So after all of that, Craig, what was your favorite movie going experience of 2021? What did you go see in the cinema that stood out as your favorite film? Because obviously this is a time of year now which people are saying this is my top 10 list of the year, etc.
I mean, it's obviously worth noting that while cinemas did come back and over time, they basically implemented the sort of the continuing restrictions of just, seating for a while. And then we got essentially regular seating back. And now we're in a stage where limited seating has returned again. Even though that those things are, happened, and we were obviously eager to go and go to the cinema a lot, I think it's safe to say that even so, the overall collection of films seen this year is still not at the usual standard that we would try and meet. So when I talk about my favorite film going experience in terms of what films I enjoyed the most, this is obviously not a definitive pick, because there's so much that probably would win out in certain situations. So basically just don't hold me to this. But in terms of what I was physically able to see this year, I think my favorite film would definitely be Judas and the Black Messiah. For me, it was honestly just one of the most striking lead performances, or technical lead performances, in Daniel Kaluuya. Just absolutely fantastic energy, embodying the spirit of his character, and just everything that the Black Panthers were just about, in just absolute striking performance. But also just gave him the right amount of times to be interactive on a sort of intimate level. The fact that we see so much vulnerability and kindness from the character, which, let's face it, I don't think a lot of people were sort of expecting from this biopic. So it was very much just that. I can't think of any other films that I've seen this year that have given me, because I'm a sucker for dramatic sort of monologues. And when you literally have so many demonstrations and so many gatherings, I don't know exactly what you officially call them, where you just get to just base your entire performance on those speeches. Yeah, that was going to win out for me.
Yeah. I think when I think of, like I said, different cinematic experiences, I think definitely a lot of people would be taking away the likes of, No Way Home and that kind of stuff. And, if people have listened to my thoughts on social media and other podcasts.
Yeah, let's not get into this now, David.
Then we would know that I was not on the same boat with that. But one that did, for me, reach that level of kind of like being in a packed cinema and reach that level of excitement, which I think we mentioned before, is like Shang-Chi. For me, that was very much like, oh, we're back. I'm sitting next to a stranger and everyone is enjoying this film and laughing, and we're all invested in this like communal experience. We're following the Marvel story. It's something new. It's something different. There's loads of great action set pieces. So that's definitely like a highlight for me in terms of like, go into the cinema sort of experiences. And then in terms of like one that was always a favorite throughout the year, it was also Into the Heights, because that was very much to me very.
Do you want to get the name right, David?
In the Heights.
Yeah, there we go.
Which was for me very much a celebration of the kind of stuff that we had missed during the pandemic and lockdowns and that kind of stuff, because it was just going back to that idea of just something that was fun and vibrant and like had very catchy songs. And just again, even if you were in like a small screening of it or a large screening, it just had a general vibe that, it was hard to hate on something like that when it's just got such a pure positive energy about it, so much of the film. And I think it just, touches on a lot of important issues, a lot of relatable elements to it. And I really enjoyed like the way that film sort of rounded itself out, by having the way that it sets itself up and the way that it starts. You think you're getting one type of story, and by the end it goes, well, actually, we're not saying to do the kind of Disney-esque, aim for the stars, like you can do anything. It's, reminding people that actually sometimes the most important things are in the places that you come from and your community, and sort of encapsulating that and bringing those dreams together with what you've got. So I thought that was a really nice message, and yeah, it just really stuck with me for the rest of like the summer in terms of an enjoyable film experience, in which I could be there tapping my feet and really just sort of like not having that kind of cynical, oh, is this right? Is this the right character arc? With something like a musical, I think you can kind of like go in a bit more with less of those kind of expectations, I guess.
I think that's fair. I think for me, In the Heights was also quite high up. It's just because it's a film adaptation of a pre-existing stage musical. It's hard for me to give a lot of that unique praise that you were giving is definitely based on just what the stage show itself would be. So that's why I have the sort of psychological divide in my head. Ironically, you liked it for the sort of positive experience. My other pick is Suicide Squad, which is very much kill all of our protagonists as much as possible.
Yeah.
But also just exactly what was needed for that group, because obviously the original completely dreadful, whereas this, it finally embodied what actually Suicide Squad is and needs to do. The fact that the opening sequence alone just delivers on everything that was promised about this film, and then slowly built upon it throughout the rest, and just the actual character interactions and just performances, because it was obviously an incredibly stellar cast. Yeah, it was a great time.
Yeah, that one definitely like stands out for me as well. In similar to Shang-Chi as well, of, you know, being at the cinema, having like an IMAX screening, you know, like big action spectacle especially. So yeah, that, and you know, the fact it's James Gunn as well, it's got the kooky crazy stuff that I'm going to enjoy, like the big visuals, etc. I think one also worth mentioning, which we probably had very much a shared experience on, because again, it's technically 2021 from it coming out in America, and so like late in December here, but just The King's Man. I know that this film has got a lot of negativity and criticism thrown at it, but I think that we collectively had a very different experience to a lot of people out there, in which, again, we just took this film for what it was and just had such a fun time watching it, just because of the, not just the ludicrous, crazy moments in which we can kind of like, you know, be laughing or smiling and look at each other like, oh my God, did they just do that? But also just, I think, you know, there was a lot of like shocking, emotional moments in there. And I think a lot of people's criticism is that they don't feel that those belong together, that they felt that it was just a constant weird mishmash of different genres and like flipping between emotional stuff and crazy stuff. Some people even think that it's disrespectful to history and that kind of thing. But, you know, that's the, you know, I would tend to disagree, but for me, this is why, you know, this was one of my favorite films of the year, because it was just such a fun time for me, because I've enjoyed the first two Kingsman films, and I felt that this carried the same energy, the same chaos, and similar, I feel, if you're going into something like the Suicide Squad, you'd be like, right, I'm expecting James Gunn, balls to the wall, crazy stuff. And I think some people went into Kingsman expecting something different, whereas this gave me exactly what I wanted and more.
Can I just go on a little tangent about why I think people's criticisms of The Kingsman are just ludicrous?
Yeah, I prefer you to do it so I don't get gunned on social media, because you're not on Twitter, so reflect my thoughts, Craig.
So a few things then. One, I think for the people who think it is disrespectful to history, I get it up until a point. What I would say is that there are films that are genuinely trying to tell more realistic depictions of history that come off as more offensive. And I think those are the type of films that you should, you know, worry about in terms of picking out whether or not this is worthy of hate, right? There are genuinely biopics there that do horrendous things in terms of history, and I think you should go after, as opposed to this, which they are not claiming that seriously there is a secret organization trying to take down Britain just because of, you know, they took a guy's dad, right? That is a ludicrous situation. I think this, obviously, what the franchise itself is generally trying to do is trying to usurp a lot of those sort of global politics aspects anyway, and just look at like the absolute ludicrous things that, you know, other franchises try to do, whilst also embracing a lot of the good qualities of that. So I think that argument is utter shit. What I would say for anyone who doesn't like the idea of mishmashing genres, can I point out to you that some of the most critically acclaimed films out there do this, right? Look at a lot of children's media that people hold up as genuine bastions of animation, right? Look at The Lion King. You have the death of Mufasa, which many people consider to be incredibly scarring and something that their children need a lot of counseling to kind of deal with, followed directly by hyenas then trying to kill Simba so he runs off, right? Another dark aspect, is then followed by Scar taking power and then taking over Pride Rock, right? Dark aspect again, followed by Hakuna Matata and Timon and Pumbaa. That is obviously a mishmashing of genres. The reason you do that is because if you only have a film that has a consistent tone throughout in terms of that, you don't get any of the peaks and valleys in terms of enjoyment. It is because the film is so happy-go-lucky that the shock of the genuine drama comes out of nowhere. That's what makes it more powerful. And if that's the tone that then continues throughout, it's a miserable experience, right? Another film that I really liked of this year, but I said for me is hampered very much by the ending, which is needed, but there was no real way they could marry these two concepts, was Don't Look Up. That film was very much a situation of, we're going to be talking about these devastating consequences in a very light-hearted tone, until right at the end where it's just going, well, we are just all going to die. Spoiler for anyone, but like, this is a film paralleling climate change, right? This is basically what's going to happen. I think if you're like spoiler of the idea of, we're all going to die, then you're a naive prick. I just find that ludicrous. The thing is as well, I obviously know it's not a perfect film, but it was a film that we came out and just thought, we don't have any immediate criticism. I don't understand what people's big gripes with this film would be. And if it is true, it's just, it's a mishmashing of genres,
Yeah,
so are the original films, if you think about it. It's just to a lesser degree. Or if it's just this disrespectful to history, watch American Sniper and tell me that isn't, and tell me you could get away with that more. Just it's bonkers.
Yeah, and I think similar things have happened with other films where people have said, that The Kingsman has gone, well, 1 minute it wants to be this happy-go-lucky spy film, the next minute it wants to be this kind of like World War I serious look at history, which again, look at Wonder Woman, that does very much the same thing. It wants to be this kind of like Greek goddess kind of like superhero movie, but then also wants to show the, true dark elements of the war. So, that The Kingsman works on a similar level. I never felt like it was just kind of copying Wonder Woman, but I felt they had the same appeal of going, yeah, things can somewhat be, sometimes be crazy and ludicrous and bonkers, but sometimes we also have to come down to reality and go, this is actually the reality of the situation. And I think, again, like you with Lion King, etc., I would point to something like the Titanic, film, like that's very much, 1 minute it's all like lovey-dovey and like, oh, I'm swept off my feet. And then the next minute it's kind of like taking a tragedy. And it very much does kind of like make it a spectacle, a big like disaster movie, which, realistically, it's actually like a horrific moment in human history. So, we have a big history within movies of taking certain genres or moments in history and kind of mixing up the tone and feel of that. And I think sometimes it is okay to kind of go, you can have several of those different beats within a movie because it can just work on different levels. What we were talking about in terms of those shocking left turn moments, similar in Iron Man 3, which again, I know loads of people have a problem with that film, but that's why that film stood out more to me, that it had the balls to kind of go, you think it's this type of film, and then suddenly we're just going to like take this weird left turn and go, oh, this isn't what I expected. And I always have to respect something which takes a risk like that rather than just being exactly what you expected, which is what the experience was with a lot of films this year, I think.
But narratively as well, you've got to think about the reason why Kingsman did it. They made it very clear that the reason they wanted the spy espionage sort of stuff was very much to avoid the tragedies of war. So when, they first do it and then it turns out that didn't work, you then have to show the tragedies of war that they were trying to prevent.
Yeah.
And that's what the film then does.
Yeah. And again, I can't throw too much shade at something which had, is just there going, this secret organization which operated in World War One was founded by like a nanny and like a African British butler, using a network of other nannies and butlers to find out information from these super important people. And I'm like, I've got to respect that. And also the fact that the main, King's man himself is somebody who's opposed to war, and fighting and taking people's lives. I'm like, you've got to respect the commentary and the, the parallels and the messages they're trying to put in there. One of my big, favorite lines from that film was, in order to keep my promise to your mother, I must now break, the promise I made to myself. So it's a nice film that has these elements of like promises and, what are your morals and your beliefs, which again, I makes it so that I can sort of see those as the strengths as opposed to some of the flaws that it does have.
Yeah, absolutely.
So definitely a fun time which we had at the cinema watching that one, even though a lot of people might disagree.
Those people can suck it.
Let us know at home, over on the socials. We'll be putting up some posts. What were your favourite films of 2021? Be careful if The Kingsman wasn't one of your favourite films. So this will be a good chance now to go into our look back at the movie vault. So it's a new year and it's a chance to look back at the films that we've put into our vault of movies. Every time we discuss a franchise or a topic or a specific film, we always say at the end of those episodes, does this deserve to be encapsulated for all time, to be remembered for this certain aspect? You know, should it be remembered as, you know, one of the famous sci-fi films, or you know, a famous bad Valentine's Day movie as we've had in the past. So this is giving us a chance to reflect on our list of films that we put in there. Maybe some of them we were a bit too heavy-handed. Maybe we put too many films in when we were kind of being broad about the topic, and sort of remembering what we've put in there and why we put it in. So yeah, Craig, how are you feeling going into this? You know, about making the definitive movie vault list.
I think we already know we're gonna fight. Like we had a meeting last night to discuss how we go about this, and there are some facets which I think the end of our discussions basically presented with, well, if we can't agree on it here, we might as well do it on the podcast.
Bring that drama into the episode.
Basically, it's just going to be me telling you why David's wrong a lot.
So, yeah, we're giving this chance now for the film god who we choose all of these movies for him to have a bit of a tidy up down in that well, so he can know officially what's in the vault, what he needs to watch. So we've got our list of movies. This is going to be your chance now to refresh yourself at home in terms of what is on our list. By the end of this, we will have our definitive list going into 2022, so we know what else that we need to discuss or should be added to that list in the future. So we go back all the way to when we started Well Good Movies, just over 2.5 years ago. We started by talking about the man himself, Steven Spielberg, and we had just a kind of a broad conversation. We did sort of pick like standout Spielberg movies for ourselves, but it wasn't to the same degree as we said, where we'd be talking about things like Van Helsing, in which we purely focused on those films themselves. So the ones that we took away from that conversation were Jurassic Park, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. So to me, I think, you know, we've talked, as you said, you know, off air about like franchises and stuff like that. And whether we should have like that one film that represents a franchise. In that episode, Laura picked Temple of Doom, which is her favorite one, which is very much a controversial choice because a lot of people feel that out of the first three, that's maybe the weakest or it's the most crazy. And I think that's why when you do look at film history, that, you know, something like Raiders of the Lost Ark is so famous. You know, I think it is a nice element to have that kind of original trilogy there as the first films of the movie vault. For me, I think we just didn't talk enough about Jurassic Park to kind of keep it in there. But I could also understand that it's such a famous movie, but I think our audiences at home would appreciate us maybe talking about Jurassic Park in the future. But I know you had maybe disagreements on that element of just taking something out to bring it back in later on.
I mean, for me, given this was the first episode that we did this, I just think that the episode itself had to go through a lot of shaping, and for me, given that was a very successful episode for us, I would want to honor that episode in terms of everything that we physically did. I think, let's face it, we've discussed films already that have gone in and basically talked about it in a way of justifying going back in. I don't think it's ludicrous to suggest we're probably going to have some form of dinosaur episode at some point in the future in which Jurassic Park will be discussed properly and sort of like honored as to why it's physically there. Not to mention the fact that how many other Jurassic Park films are there now? Yeah. There's like, what, 5 others that we have to discuss? I think it's safe to say they will be discussed alongside it. So I just don't think it's worthwhile taking out. Our discussion yesterday was whether or not we removed any of the Indiana Jones films. And it's nice to see that on the recording now, you've gone, no, I think we keep it there, which is basically, this is the argument I don't want to have.
Yeah, that I've had some time to think it over. I'm like, yeah, you know what, keep them in as a 3, because like I said, I think out of it, you could only say, right, only keep Raiders of the Lost Ark. But again, you know, we were talking about Temple of Doom in that situation, and you wouldn't just want to have 2, you know, complete the trilogy, isn't it? But
also, it's just what Steven Spielberg's known for. He's known for having one of the more successful sort of trilogies. Because let's face it, in the era in which these films came out, trilogies were not that big a thing. or at least to the extent that they are now. Right?
Yeah.
Because I think for people to be so fond of in different ways of these three films, I think it was quite nice for a Spielberg episode to have his most iconic film and also his most iconic franchise. So that's why I think they're representative of Spielberg. Honestly, I'm surprised nobody's come after us for not putting things in like E.T.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. We talked about things like E.T., Jaws, and again, I think at that time we said, these are too big of films to sort of just like chuck in now, because we could have filmed, we could have put about 10, 12 films into the movie vault talking about Spielberg. But I guess we did talk a lot about the charm and the cinematic nature that Spielberg brings to his films, which Jurassic Park does encapsulate. And like you said, there's a lot of room for us to talk about dinosaur films in the future. So yeah, you're definitely right in that sense. Probably the caveat I would add is that maybe the first 3 Indiana Jones films would just be the top of that list because they were more of a focus in that episode. So Jurassic Park will be like our 4th film added to the movie vault list. So we know that those 4 remain in there, but maybe just reorder them in terms of listing, in terms of when we discuss them.
Right, let me get this straight. Part of this episode is just, it's not just what films are in there, it's the order. I don't give a damn about the order. We don't need to discuss the syntax of this list. Right? Going into this, I said to you, what order are we going to do these films? Are we going to do them in the order in which they went in or alphabetically? Hence my way of saying I don't care what order they're presented within the actual vault itself. Right? You could have literally swapped the order of those films on this list anyway, and I wouldn't have given a damn. I wouldn't have noticed.
That I'm not like beholden to the order if people want to look at them in a different order, but this is just showing my kind of pedantic side in which I'm just like, I need to put that somewhere else on this list for my own sanity, basically.
Listeners, I'm sorry that David's wasting your time with this.
Hey, when we read it out every time, people understand more now. They're like, oh, why did they start with Jurassic Park, then have 3 films? Oh, it's so much neater having 3 films then the Jurassic Park film.
Oh, Jesus Christ, you're not going to like what's coming up then.
So we then talked about Joker when we were talking about like Batman films and the legacy of Joker. We also talked about horror films in our Halloween episode, talking about classic movie monsters. So in those episodes, we had The Man Who Laughs, The Dark Knight, Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, Frankenstein, and Creature from the Black Lagoon. Now, I think a lot of these are standouts, and I think that we did speak about them all specifically quite a lot, so I don't think there would be any reason to kind of like revisit them. No. Obviously, like I said, if we are talking about franchises, as if somebody did want to put the Dark Knight trilogy in there.
Don't.
But again, you wouldn't want to just remove it just to talk about that trilogy. And like you said with Jurassic Park, you can easily just be like, I want to talk about The Dark Knight Rises and why that might be better or worse than that film that's already in the vault. So, I watched The Man Who Laughs myself when we kind of revisited films from the vault, and I thought that it was very much a worthy entry in the vault. So I think that for me definitely happily stay. And I think all of them. I think that Mask of the Phantasm is a staple of animation, and Frankenstein, a classic Hollywood film. And same with Creature of the Black Lagoon. So I'm happy for all of those to stay in.
Well, I mean, Frankenstein and Creature from the Black Lagoon, if we remove them, we completely negated the entire point of the episode that we did. Because that was one of our first, we all take a film each.
Yeah, exactly.
And if we turn around and basically go, your opinion no longer matters, bye.
Yeah, so...
Also, if anyone is stupid enough to come to us and say, yeah, we think that we should talk about the entire Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy because I want to argue that instead of Dark Knight Rises should go in. What happened in your life?
Hot take, definitely.
I'm also not going to lie, I forgot that you rewatched The Man Who Laughs.
Yeah, well, that was the episode which you watched.
I watched Groundhog
Day, yeah. So we'll get to that one soon. So we then had more of a discussion-based episode when we talked about musicals, so obviously a very big, broad topic, and a film that did come up much, much later on, which recently. So we added to the movie vault that time My Fair Lady, Mary Poppins, Rocky Horror Picture Show. After that episode, we had Christmas movies. Like you said with the Halloween one, Craig, we all chose a Christmas movie that was like a favorite of ours or kind of summed up the festive period. So with that one, we had It's a Wonderful Life, Muppets Christmas Carol, Elf, and Home Alone. So I think for the Christmas ones, I think it's the same thing. I think because they were such special Christmas movies, I think all 4 of them are like big yearly watches for people, I would be happy to keep all of those in.
I also don't want to watch more Christmas films.
Well, there's still plenty out there, but yeah, I don't see any need. We'd have to like revisit those ones. As we've discussed, Mary Poppins has definitely now cemented her place in the movie vault because we've discussed it with Boxing Day movies, and it is a good reflection of musicals. At the same
congratulations. You're moaning about the lack of discussion about that film is finally over.
And I think, for me, the big takeaway from that episode was, we asked people like Kiara, what's a big standout for you? And Rocky Horror Picture Show was one that stood out. So I just don't know if My Fair Lady just hasn't had any kind of attention to really warrant it being there.
What was the rationale of it going in?
It very much was just kind of the most famous, what are the most famous musicals, or what do you think if somebody was to say, here's the best of musical movies, this is what you point to. But it was very much something that was discussed at the stage of the movie vault, but wasn't brought up throughout the episode. So I just not sure if we kind of give over, like you said, like with that question, have we given a clear enough reason why it's in there? I think Rocky Horror Picture Show, we very much talked about, is such a fun time. It's created such a legacy. People going to see it in costume at the cinema. My Fair Lady was very much just like you said, with something like, oh, it's like Jaws. It's just a famous musical. It's up there with the greats. We have to put it in for that reason.
Just a famous musical. Careful with your wording, boy.
Well, I'm just paraphrasing as to what that discussion was. Maybe I'd have to like revisit the entire episode, but it was very much talked about at the movie vault stage. So I just don't know if we've really given it the attention it deserves to kind of like say, that deserves its place in the movie vault, because we didn't really discuss it.
To be fair, I think what didn't help was the entire musical episode very much focused on a particular era of musicals. And then this film does not necessarily match the era that we were discussing.
No.
So if you were looking for something to cull, not on the basis of its quality, on the basis of a discussion, then I would probably nominate it just for another chance.
Yeah. I to be clear, I don't think anything I'll be discussing in this list would be something that I think quality shouldn't be there. But
some things for me, I will. There's one particular film that if I can argue to get it out, I will get it out.
I think obviously there's still the element of if somebody has wanted to go in and they've convinced at least one of us, then I think we should respect that. But we'll see. We'll get on to it. We then talked about Star Trek movies because we had Rise of Skywalker, which was coming out, directed by J.J. Abrams, who also had directed 2 Star Trek films. So we used that as a chance to talk about the 2 films he directed, but it was also a celebration of the Star Trek franchise as a whole. These were 2 films that Di and Matt saw brought up and felt that they were the best representations of Star Trek. So do we kind of, stay true to that, I guess, in that me personally, I haven't got much history with the older Star Trek films, so I can't really say that doesn't deserve to be there because I have not seen it. And we sort of asked that question of them, what is the best representation of Star Trek?
So this is a different thing, right? Obviously, of that, Star Trek 2009 stays in.
Yeah.
However, the context of the discussion was very different in that the entire point of comparing the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films was specifically to look at how they compared to what Star Trek is actually meant to be. So it's not just a case of, what do we think of movie musicals? What would we consider the pinnacle? Yeah. It's exactly how do these things compare to these standards, and what are these standards that you're holding these films up to? So realistically, even though there wasn't a direct conversation about those particular films, what those films represented and how they do, especially when we had to, especially with Wrath of Khan, because you have to make direct comparisons to Into Darkness, given that that film is so reliant on what Wrath of Khan does.
Yeah.
That I think if that was the discussion and that was the lens that it was held through, I think we have to leave the films there.
Yeah. And I think for me, The Undiscovered Country was definitely the standout there in terms of like Di saying this is what Star Trek is the kind of, like exploring new worlds. So Wrath of Khan did stand out to me in that sense. But yeah, I think you're right with the Into Darkness comparison. So happy to keep those in. We then get to like an interesting point then, which we kind of, similar to this, we did a kind of bonus episode. We were looking at movies of the decade because we were going into 2020. Oh, how naive we were. And we were sort of celebrating the films of the past 10 years, going back to 2010. So here we kind of threw in a lot of films.
And you've already taken some out.
Well,
this is why I'm opposed to this particular section. You already removed some of the things that we added.
This was me like going back and like adding everything that which we especially put in, so like, into the movie vault this week goes Jurassic Park, Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I put in all of those films when I made this list. When I got to the movies of the decade one, I very much was like, okay, right, and everything down. And I was like, right, there was some here which we just didn't talk about at all, and I just listed off at some point. So I'm just putting in the ones which we specifically mentioned. But feel free if you want to bring up some ones that that were mentioned, you're unhappy of already.
Oh no,
being
I don't
told.
care. I'm just saying, if you've already edited this part, saying, right, what else do we need to remove? No, you left them in for a reason. They were justified films.
Yeah.
So we're just going to quickly breeze past the films that are staying in the vault.
Well, I didn't know if there was just anything in terms of like time or context has changed, like our opinion of it, but
Probably not, to be honest. The films in question, everyone, are Whiplash, Mad Max Fury Road, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Captain America's Civil War, Avengers, Avengers Age of Ultron, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame.
those ones are kind of coupled. I think I've put those together for ease, but they kind of go in with the Wanda and Vision episode discussion that we had there. Yeah, I think it's hard to remove any of those, frankly, isn't it? So
I mean, if you make me justify again why Whiplash stays in.
No. I just meant, was there anything that you were upset that has gone? But yeah, probably not the best time to be discussing films that should be in there when we're trying to cull some. So then we also had our specific Star Wars episode discussion where we were talking about like our rankings of the franchise. So we had two big Star Wars fans with Kyle and Kieran, and we were talking about like our personal rankings of what was our top film, what was our worst, etc. And our takeaway from that was that, obviously, again, like Indiana Jones, the original three had to go in: New Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi. And then two standouts for all of us were Revenge of the Sith and Force Awakens, in all agreeing that those are just kind of very much represent the best of those eras. So I think, again, it's hard to kind of argue against any of that stuff.
That is not what you were saying last night, kiddo. You were ready for one of these films to go, and I was ready on the
I was saying that as an example. I said, for example. I wasn't specifically saying, oh, that film, I want to go. I was
You said, and I quote, I think we should get rid of Revenge of the Sith for cleanliness.
I don't know if I said it exactly like that, but my point was that do we just keep in A New Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi for the, like you said, the cleanliness of that trilogy being in there?
No.
But ultimately, if you're going to pick a best of the prequels in the future, then Revenge of the Sith would just end up being in there again anyway, wouldn't it? So
I just think it is stupid for us to go over this particular conversation. If four people all agreed after extensive conversations of that film, even all of us ranked the films right, and we got to Revenge of the Sith and specifically talked about the things that we liked about it. If we all agree on that.
Yeah. Basically, I think it just would be, in the future, if anybody wants to recommend, a Star Wars film again, it'd be nice to deep dive into one of them.
Yeah, but fine. But also note that there are films which are still relatively controversial within the Star Wars canon, and I think some people probably would, like myself, and not getting what I consider to be the second best Star Wars film getting into the vault.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of sacrifices that have to be made. So yeah, we'll keep all of that there. Possibly, this could be going into some tricky territory now. So again, staying in the franchise world, we've talked about Wonder Woman as one of the standout DC films when we said about movies of the decade. We then had a DC sort of look back because of Birds of Prey coming out, and when we discussed sort of each film with Kellen and Jake Hart. So the ones that came from that one were Man of Steel and Shazam. And I think it's tricky for us to say about feelings on those, because again, that was so much that those were favorites of our guests, or maybe just because it was like, well, Wonder Woman's already there, what else do we put in? So I know for you, Craig, the Shazam was a surprise when you looked back at the list.
It was more just because of just allowing more than one film in. I mean, of those two films that are in, Shazam is the one I prefer. It's more, I'm surprised that other people just sort of allowed it in. Yeah. Because I know that there was also sentiment of, does Aquaman go in? And I was very much against it.
Yeah, see, that's the thing on reflection, if it's making a definitive list and we've already got Man of Steel and Wonder Woman in there to represent, DC, the fact we've also had Justice League, the Snyder Cut come out, maybe that sort of changed people's lens a bit, but I don't know, as much as, I do enjoy Shazam and stuff like that, would I say that it's something that needs to be encapsulated for all time and needs to be made famous? I just think if you've got something like Man of Steel in there, which I, again, can appreciate, and I myself don't particularly find it a great film, but I can respect that it does a lot for the theme, the Hans Zimmer element. It brings in a lot of elements that are carried throughout the Snyder films. It's very much a lot of people's favorite iteration of Superman. So I'd be happy to keep something like that in, because I can appreciate that people have a lot of connections to that. But I don't know, I just still don't feel that there's much, like, we've talked about Wonder Woman so many times where, like, this is why this is important. We brought it up in that Kingsman conversation, but I just don't feel that Shazam's got much of a legacy still. It's just it just kind of came and went, and we're excited about the sequel, sure, but I still don't know whether it deserves this kind of, like, especially after all those films we mentioned. I'm like,
See, for me, I think it'll have a much, because let's face it, it had a bit of a crammed conversation. I think realistically, once the sequel comes out, and because it's also relatively connected to Black Adam, right?
Yeah.
See, once I think those films come out, I think it has a much better chance of, actually discussing the merits of the character and the representation.
Well, do we cull it now and then see how well it stands up at that time?
Yeah, sure. If people are unhappy about it, then we'll bring it up.
I would go for, like, I think we've done to taking the one out so far, but I think the fact that we got Wonder Woman in there, yeah, sure, some people could say that Marvel has got a lot of representation already, but we're talking about that as in, like, the Avengers franchise was so successful as itself.
I mean, spoiler, guys, Marvel in general make better movies.
Yeah, so I'd say for now, Shazam, unfortunately, I just don't feel that its legacy is sort of held up enough for it. I mean,
not to mention the fact that we also still have not officially discussed films like Birds of Prey, and technically Suicide Squad.
Yeah, so a lot of people's lists would have changed as well.
Yeah.
Right, this is kind of an interesting era which we have here now. So this is where we start to get into bad territory with bad quality of films. We discussed bad Valentine's Day movies or bad rom-coms. So we have Good Luck Chuck. We then revisited our sort of like monster movie days, where we went to the Invisible Man films because the new version of that was coming out. So we had The Invisible Man, The Invisible Man's Revenge, and then we sort of went into the DreamWorks films, so quite a few there. So I'll focus first on Good Luck Chuck along with the two Invisible Man films. What do you think of those, Greg, looking back now?
Our rationale for putting Good Luck Chuck in was essentially came down to, we knew this era of films was going to be bad. Pretty much the entire audience sort of agrees. It doesn't have any definitive quality apart from just sort of, popcorn, isn't this cutesy stuff. Good Luck Chuck, from what we discussed, had a lot of relatively horrendous elements to it. And we only put it in because it was the least bad of the 3 films that we discussed. Now, at the time, we were like, well, we've got to put something in, because I think at that point, every single episode, a film went in.
Yeah, true.
So we were like, we have to put in one of these, flaming turds. I don't think anyone's going to miss it.
Well, to be fair, Lucy might.
Do I care?
I don't know. I think the fact that we have talked about things like Van Helsing and Pudsey the dog, I just think that this, like you said, is the least offensive of them, but I do kind of just enjoy it as like, this is representing terrible rom-coms, because it does, like you said, while maybe it is the least offensive of a bad bunch, I still just think that it does represent that kind of like era in quite an effective way. And it kind of like pinpoints that point in the list in which you go, whoa, why is this here? And it kind of like works in that way, that like it represents that time in which we did start to go into like the more crazy bad films.
If you were going to make that argument for some of the things coming up, we are not getting along. Fine, keep it there.
Invisible Man. So obviously with these ones, I think Invisible Man's Revenge was your choice in that one. So do you, like, is that still held up for you? Because I know Invisible Man for me definitely has.
I barely remember the film. Look, if it was a case of at the time we discussed it and it goes in, I think I would have gotten enough out of it. But yeah, I mean, given how frequent you make me go through films like this, I'm not sure exactly how memorable this is. But at the same time, if I said it goes in, there's going to be a reason for it.
Yeah, well, I'm just trying to think now of your rationale. Like I said, were we like adding more in at that time, like with the Valentines of like, how many of these do we want to put in? But for me, the takeaway from that, or the thing that I remember, was that original movie and for the legacy they created. But things like The Invisible Woman and the other films, because the one I focused on was like the sequel to The Invisible Man, but it was just still a generic Invisible Man movie. So I'm like, to me, it does seem like just that was the standout, the original movie, and that's the one that should stay there for that. I'm not sure if the Revenge one just had a big enough legacy, and I don't know if I can just remember your justification for it enough to say, yeah, that definitely should stay there, because I think your points were just basically that it worked quite effectively as a sequel and as a Visible Man film, but I'm just not sure if there's enough of that like legacy. This is why it needs to be in there kind of thing.
This is difficult territory given some. I mean, given the fact we've got relatively recent films in this vault, I'm not sure how much you can rely on the idea of legacy.
But I think because the conversation with that one was a legacy of the Invisible Man films, I think, especially watching that Invisible Man film, I'm like, the new one, I'm like, I think it's like, right, I can see that this is a very different Invisible Man film, and that original is very much of that era of the monster movies.
All right, fine. I'm looking forward to assassinating something that you worked on.
Okay. So we then had a discussion with Nia, talking all about DreamWorks films. We also had our sort of transition into the pandemic times, where we were talking to Dan about good films to watch when in lockdown, etc. Because it was like our last ever podcast recorded in our old studio. So the films that we had there were Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon, Shrek, Shrek 2. Caveat there, I think that Shrek was maybe added in the Shrek episode with Sam Summers, but I've just put it here obviously for synergy. The Prince of Egypt, and then when we were talking about films to watch during lockdown, we had Monty Python and the Holy Grail, Groundhog Day, and Hot Fuzz. Yeah, any standouts from that one, Craig? Do you think they all deserve their place? Is there anything that you just think, like, I'm not sure if that is really justified or time has not aged well on that? I think for me, obviously, the two Shrek films are very much stood up. We've talked about Prince of Egypt quite a few times. So I don't
know. I don't think we've discussed Shrek enough on this entire podcast.
So, yeah, for me, those three definitely hold up.
Wait. Say the three again?
Shrek 2, The Prince of Egypt, we talked about enough, which I think justifies their position in the vault.
So you're going after Kung Fu Panda?
I'm not going after any of them. I'm just saying that those three I just know straight away are fine. I know that Nia picked out How to Train Your Dragon specifically. I think I might have picked out Kung Fu Panda. So, yeah, and, you know, we've talked about, I think even you, was it Steven Spielberg? I think that's like one of his, John Favreau, wasn't it? Kung Fu Panda was like one of his favorite films. Yeah. So, you know, it could stay in there for that alone as well. So again, I'll put this one to you. Is there anything there that you just feel?
I mean, of the DreamWorks, I think given the fact that we literally had somebody who had done a lot of extensive work for them,
yeah,
I think at the point where she was able to, you know, justify and accept their placement there, just let's not poke the bear too much.
No, and the fact that we've talked to somebody
bear.
like we talked to somebody like Sam Summers who's highlighted bizarre ones like the Bee Movie and stuff like that. So there's definitely a differentiation between good and bad DreamWorks. So it's good that we got the good DreamWorks in there.
For me, the more interesting conversation is going to be about these picks of just films to go in.
Yeah.
Because did we all extensively talk about them?
The lockdown ones, you mean?
Yeah.
So, yeah, well, that's the thing, isn't it? I think definitely Groundhog Day now has, because we talked about it specifically in that Revisiting the Vault episode.
Hot Fuzz has also come up periodically throughout a number of our discussions, so I think on that we leave it alone.
Yeah.
I'm coming for you, Monty Python.
Well, you know, maybe it'll go back to that franchise thing. Maybe I'm happy for it to go if it means all the other two go in at some point with it. But no, I gotta admit, I think because Groundhog Day and Hot Fuzz is like... Well, I suppose Groundhog Day is kind of an older film, very much to Hot Fuzz, but Monty Python does very much stand out in that list. It doesn't really belong in the same way. I think because we were saying about films you can enjoy during lockdown, and I don't even think that Monty Python was a good pick for like, what does that have to do with lockdown really? So, whereas Hot Fuzz and Groundhog Day was even links in with the whole elements of policing and repetitive nature that lockdown brought on.
Playing devil's advocate, I think it was very much we were all frankly a bit scared and a bit sad about everything going on.
Yeah.
And I think we had to make justifications for what films could we happily rewatch to get through things.
Yeah.
I said, and like, who said what again? Because
I think Dan said Groundhog Day, you said Hot Fuzz, I said Monty Python.
Yeah. I can remember Dan sort of justifying Groundhog Day for him. I can remember me about Hot Fuzz.
Yeah, and
I can't remember a thing you said.
no, and to be honest, I brought up the Kingsman films as well, so I think that even those would have maybe been more justified. So yeah, I'm happy actually to take it out, to be honest.
And that's not my bias if I don't remember much of what you say. Actually, no, that's a lie. I remember a lot of what you say. It's usually the other way around.
So we then discussed film, like we kind of had a few like bonus episodes as we were going into the pandemic and lockdowns, etc. So we had a revisit of like some of our favorite moments, and we also talked about films that we felt deserved to go in the movie vault based on discussions we had, which on reflection after we'd seen those new films that had come out, which were connected to them. And also ones that maybe we like felt that were missed out during certain discussions. So the two takeaways there, I believe, were Joker, Sweeney Todd, Zootopia, Knives Out, and Parasite were the films that we felt were all ones that like deserved to go in just from being like favorites of that year, or films that were connected to stuff that we had talked about. I think Joker is definitely justified still because we had that entire episode discussion about it.
The entire point of that episode was preluding to what the film was. And then you basically said we never actually had a chance to discuss how we thought the film was.
Yeah.
We did. It goes in. Sweeney Todd was, you thought it should have gone in from the musicals. Didn't say during the musicals, but hey-ho.
Yeah.
But based on the discussion, thought it should go in, so we put it in. Zootopia, what was the context behind that?
I think that was maybe one that we had sort of talked about during the movies of the decade, but I just didn't list when we were talking about things that went in from that. So we kind of added it in as a kind of like, oh, we forgot
and yet
to put
you
this
didn't
in.
think to randomly slip it in when you were just taking out other films.
Yeah.
Bear in mind, I think some of the films you
But it's
took out...
because I specifically said in that episode, going in this week is Zootopia. Because
Bear
we
in mind
felt
as
like
well, listeners, one of the things he took out was Toy Story 3.
Oh yeah, controversial.
Yeah. I just want people to know that. Knives Out, I think we literally did a 1 year anniversary episode for the thing. It stays in. Parasite stays in for this crucial reason. We basically talked about what films we've watched should necessarily go in, and a big standout. We talked about why is a big band standout, but also I want to stand up to racists who were saying, why did this win an American Film Award? Because it's a good film, you dipshits.
Yeah. Also, we had an Oscars special as well, so that it's justified in that sense. So, yeah, I think everything there is fine. We then went on to, going into lockdown, we wanted to talk about some fun, like easy musical kind of stuff. So we talked about the Muppet movies. So from that one, we talked with Joe, and we put in the Muppet movie, The Muppets Take Manhattan, and Muppet Treasure Island. I assume from the conversations we've already had, the fact that the Muppet movie wasn't... We all had like specific films that we talked about. I believe Muppet movie wasn't one of those, because I think that Joe had Muppets Take Manhattan, you had Muppets in Space, and I had Muppets Most Wanted.
Yeah.
But I still did watch the Muppet movie in preparation for that episode, and we just talked about like its legacy and how it's influenced the other films. And Muppet Treasure Island wasn't one that we talked about, but again, it was kind of the Revenge of the Sith thing of like, this is still one of the best Muppet movies, even though we've not actually
Even then, I
picked it.
think, even though we didn't have a deep dive on either of those films, I think we justified why they go in specifically from the basis of that conversation.
Yeah. I think it's just fun as well that we have the Muppet movie, Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppet Christmas Carol, and Muppet Treasure Island in the movie vault. When, like we said, a lot of DC and Batman films are not in there, but hey, we haven't done a Batman episode yet.
Give it time. To be fair,
don't at us.
I also think that... What year did it come out? 2010 Muppet movie?
This is the original, like the Jim.
No,
Henson
as in the reboot.
Yeah. Oh,
what
yeah.
year did that
it
come
was
out?
something, yeah, like
It was like 2010.
2011, something like that.
I also think that would be worthy of going in one day, but I'm not going to advocate for it here. So there are times where films can just come up like that. Right?
Yeah. Right, interesting again. So here,
No, it's not interesting again.
Well, it is once you go down a bit. So we then had our discussion of films that we felt that each other should see, that we had talked about to each other before. So Craig give me Rent, I give you Tron Legacy. I think the justification for that made quite a lot of sense, that like we both felt that you felt that the legacy of Rent still came through with the stage show, etc. So it still felt that like if it made me want to go see the stage show, then the film did its job in that sense.
Also, I think given the fact that last night we watched Tick Tick Boom, which is about the creator of Rent and his story, and very much I think David is sort of one round more to the style of what Rent is based on the life of the writer himself and exactly the sort of things he's done. I think it's a lot harder for David to argue now that Rent should go out.
And also, like, there's not a filmed stage version, so without that film, I wouldn't have had the context of what happens in Tick Tick Boom. So yeah, time has aided that choice. And I think it was the same with like Tron Legacy, of like revisiting the original Tron film. Then we went to the era which was defined by Adam Sandler, in which Big Daddy and Happy Gilmore went in. Again, this is difficult, isn't it? Because this was like favorites picked by Shelley. I definitely agree. Like Big Daddy, I can't really remember much. I've seen Happy Gilmore,
I argued heavily for Happy Gilmore to go in.
Oh, okay, was it?
Look, let's be fair, everyone. I had a miserable time during these specials. The fact that I ended up writing a specific monologue about my hatred of Jack and Jill, I think you throw me a bone of some enjoyment of where I can give Adam Sandler any form of credit.
See, I was mixing up in my mind. I was like, did Craig have Happy Gilmore? But then, no, you had...
I had Waterboy.
Waterboy.
Which was also a miserable experience.
Right, so those ones are safe.
I love it too, mama. Cough.
We then went to films that are like about music, but not musicals themselves, triggered by the Eurovision film, which we then also put Inside Llewyn Davis and School of Rock and Pitch Perfect. This was like quite a weird one, and even I think the episode itself people were confused about, because remember when I tried to do the Eurovision element, and people were coming in with like their favorite music-based films, and half of them were
some of them were just Whiplash.
Yeah, but some of them were also just musicals, and I was like, so. I don't know. It's a similar thing. I'm not sure if something like Inside Llewyn Davis, like even though I think it is a good film, it would deserve its place there. But in the context of that one, on reflection, not so sure. But
yeah. So for me, this is my controversial stake. Of those 4 films, on the basis of the actual discussions that we had and the basis of what we actually wanted to do, I think the only film that stays in there is Eurovision: The Song of Fire Saga.
Damn it!
You wanted it gone.
Yeah,
you're not getting it gone.
I just remembering that it was like you and Kiara enjoyed it a lot more than I did. So I was
miserable.
I was kind of against it when we originally put it in. But
here's the thing, right? I think just the conversation we had after that was disjointed because it was very much focused on those rankings. I think we put in those films to sort of honor that ranking. I think they have better chances in other areas, so I'm not sure if they would. So
you're saying actually get rid of like the other 3 and keep that in? Okay. I could agree with that actually. So
yeah. Well, you thought I was going to nuke them all?
No, I thought you were going to like maybe nuke that because you would be like, oh, these are all 3 other good films. But I'm not sure if time has aged Eurovision as well. But
yeah, but I think for also what it, like in terms of quality film, right, maybe not. But in terms of what it actually represented, let's face it, Eurovision itself is going to have a long-standing legacy. And I think a lot of people are still going to buy into the weirdness of Eurovision because of Story of Fire Saga.
Yeah, and especially I suppose after talking about Adam Sandler films, you could still be talking about like Will Ferrell films and stuff like that as well.
Yeah. Also, I hear a lot on different radio stations, a combination of what is the song at the end? So, like
there's Ya Ya Ding Dong.
No. The song, like the actual last Eurovision actual song.
Is that the one she changes it?
Changes it to, yeah.
Yeah, it's like your home or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. I hear that on the radio a lot. I hear Ya Ya Ding Dong references a lot. True. You cannot tell me this film doesn't have a legacy.
Yeah, true. Actually, and I do love Ya Ya Ding Dong.
Yeah.
So,
suck it.
And also, Iceland did eventually do pretty well in Eurovision eventually. So
also Eurovision is having a lot of impact on the mainstream music scene because Måneskin won it this year, right?
Yeah. So
I say this year, 2021.
Yeah. So a few more then, which like we had our X-Men episode with X2, X-Men United. We had a looking at streaming services where we were talking about the problems with Netflix. We had Human Traffic and Extra go in as recommendations. We had also I Am Mother as a highlight for one from Netflix. Talking about noir films, we had Sunset Boulevard and Rafifi, and then we went on to our discussion about like Disney adaptations. So if we go up to like Rafifi in terms of again some more like niche ones, I think you said it earlier, like one of the standouts that we've watched was X2, so I think that one for me is safe.
Yep.
I think, again, talking about that, like, you know, bringing on someone who's a specialist. Nia loved noir so much. I think that means the Sunset Boulevard and Rafifi, you know, are also safe.
Yep. Also, Sunset Boulevard was so impactful for us, it made its way into our intro.
Exactly, yeah. So happy to keep those in. Others, like I said, I put in I Am Mother, but I'd happy actually just for that to go. So again, it was that kind of idea of like, oh, we have to put something in that represents Netflix. Well, actually, do we?
Especially considering Netflix has a lot stronger range of films that can actually fulfill its role much
since
better.
As well, because they've actually had so many more originals. Like their quality has actually gone up quite a lot, as we saw with Tick Tick Boom, etc. So I'm happy to take
Tick
that
Tick
out.
Boom, Don't Look Up.
Yeah.
Like this year alone. Also, let's not forget, Roma was a Netflix.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think we were joined by Elliot Slade, you know, filmmaker, during that episode, and there was like a discussion of like British cinema. I think one that he kind of like recommended was Extra, but again, that was something that we've not seen, and he said it was a very weird choice. Human Traffic was one that stood out to me, and I think so for me, I would be
just justified that one a lot more.
Yeah, I think I'm happy to keep Human Traffic in, but get rid of Extra, to be honest. Yep. Sorry, Elliot, but hopefully we can talk about it. Come back on the podcast and we'll talk about it in the future, but I think it's just for legacy's sake, we'd prefer to have that deeper dive into it. So
yeah. Sorry, Extra, you were just extra baggage.
So going to the Disney remakes then, we had Mulan go in as the original, which was interesting because this was before the live action one came out, and then we also chose 101 Dalmatians as in that as a good remake, didn't we, with Edge choosing them.
At the time, only good sort of live adaptation.
Yeah, we talk a lot about Disney adaptations. What's your feelings on these two, Craig?
I mean, it's clearly they both stay in, right?
Yeah.
At the point where the entire episode about Mulan, we had a discussion about the original film and what makes it good, and therefore just whether or not it should be touched in the first place.
Yeah.
And also, I advocated hard that 101 Dalmatians was like my favorite live adaptation remake, even if you do not necessarily consider it in the same sort of vein as, say, everything from Maleficent onwards, just because it's a different era. I think it is the thing that started it. We leave it alone.
Yeah, and I think I'd probably definitely put the caveat that maybe we should just put a brackets with the date of Mulan, just so people don't think that the remake is in there, just because a lot of people have major issues with that film. Especially the fact that it was filmed in a slave, like a place that like promotes slave camps. So we are talking about the 90s film.
Yeah, let's not talk about the actual like politics.
No. We then talked about Charlie Chaplin films. So we had The Great Dictator, The Kid. Here we are starting to get more into the territory in which we're talking about specific films. We're not talking broadly about them. So yeah, I'm just going to list off quite a few here from ones which were specific. So we have The Great Dictator, The Kid, Trick or Treat, Volcano, Gosford Park, Gremlins, and Edward Scissorhands. So those were talking about Charlie Chaplin films, ones that represented Halloween, end of the world disaster movies, murder mystery films, and dark Christmas films. I think, again, all of those we discussed enough that they justify their placement in there.
I may not agree with some of them, but they were discussed, they were voted on, so...
Yeah. We then had Dan and Joe came on talking about, like we said earlier, the future of cinema, etc. They said the best ones which reflected that kind of weird year of cinema, you know, cinemas being closed and films being cancelled were The Hunt and Trolls World Tour. I'm not sure so much about The Hunt because to me, again, I agree with them. I think the Trolls World Tour does very much reflect that weird time.
Oh, you coward.
But I don't know if The Hunt does.
I don't even know what The Hunt is, so I want that one gone.
That was, it was a film that was cancelled, or it was postponed before the pandemic because of US, you know, it was like a Hunger Games kind of thing in which like rich people are like hunting people down in America for sport, and because of maybe a shooting or something that happened in America, they postponed it. But then because of the pandemic, it just got ridiculously postponed. So that's why I don't think it reflects that.
No
like
Time
COVID.
to Die does that.
So I agree with Joe. I think that the Trolls one was a particularly weird thing of like it released digitally and you had to pay £20 for it. So sorry, Dan. I think.
However, I would argue that if we're going to be looking at it from that scope, there are films that have happened since then that represent that sort of funding model a lot worse. AKA, I think what Disney did with a lot of theirs in terms of, you know, the premier access to Mulan. was more definitive.
I know, but I think that it's just because at that time we said, right now, what represents that era? And because I think it'd just be a bit unfair to go, oh, well, since these other films have done that, and which one do you choose? There's so many. But I think what Joe said, and I still agree with, is that Trolls was the first film to do that. So it was the first one to ever go, right, we're taking this from a cinema release and putting it on thing for £25, £30, and everyone was like, this is ludicrous. Whereas by the time Disney started doing that, some more people were still on board with it. So I do agree that Trolls World Tour was still just such a game changer for being the first to do that. And there was that whole, like, the cinemas were protesting, being like, we're not putting Universal in our, we're not showing Universal films anymore and all of this kind of stuff. So I think I think that was still
this sickens
the pinnacle. Hey, it's up there with Good Luck, Chuck.
Fine, it stays, but this sickens me.
We then had like influential movies, which we talked about with good friend Alid. So there we had Toy Story, The Shining, V for Vendetta. We also then talked about versus movies when Godzilla vs. Kong was coming out. So we had Gamera versus Gaios. We then went to Mortal Kombat from 1995, which we talked about because the new version of Mortal Kombat was coming out. And then we went over to Oscar films, and we had Lawrence of Arabia recommended by Steph. So again, here, I think the one that stands out is Lawrence of Arabia because there wasn't much of a discussion. We did kind of say to Steph, what is a good Oscar-winning film? What do you pick? Because there's so many great ones. I think even Steph said, there's so many they could choose. And if I was to choose one, okay, maybe this film. But again, I just feel this like it's such a broad topic. It's like, what is the one Oscar film that you think reflects all Oscar winning films? But again, there wasn't really much of a discussion about it. It was just, Steph did go like, oh, if there was going to be one, it would be this. But I just think, something like that deserves a discussion.
I feel that we went about that in realistically the wrong way because again, I think that was us trying to say, well, it's obviously about Oscars, obviously something's going to go in. If we are literally going to be talking about the strength of these films and the sort of legacy, realistically it will spill over in other ways, right? Note how we've already got a number of films, but we've already glossed over in this list and also got coming up that did win Oscars or are likely to win Oscars for those reasons, right? And I think realistically, if we're going to be looking at that sort of legacy, that's how we do it for particularly those types of films. So yeah, I think Lawrence of Arabia is gone. Everything else, I think, does have to stay. Yeah. Because Toy Story, The Shining, V for Vendetta, they were films that were inspirational to us. We very much had to discuss them. That's fine. Gamera versus Gaios, the entire point of both that episode and the end game itself was discussing its merit to go in. It won outright, right? The film's quality was argued well enough that it won outright an Endgame. Mortal Kombat, I actually think does stay in because
the new one was worse.
I don't think the new one was worse, but it's also just, again, for what we were looking at as like the era of basically using your logic now for why Good Luck Chuck survives, right? If we're looking at the era of video game film adaptations of that era, we discussed it. It very much stands out, and hell, the fact that they wanted to remake it just means it has a legacy there.
Yeah. So yeah, and I think then from there on, like I said, that the list got a lot shorter because we did start to get a lot more focused, and we had stuff like Pudsey the dog, the movie, etc., which came up.
If that went in, I'd quit.
But we also had X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, which we talked about in our sort of X-Men Beginnings trilogy discussion after talking about the original 3 films. We then talked about Little Miss Sunshine, as you discussed earlier. We had Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory when we celebrated that anniversary. We had Excalibur, which I mentioned from our King Arthur episode, GoldenEye from our Bond episode, and Bridge on the River Kwai from our Boxing Day movies. There's also a bonus one, which I'll get to in a second. But out of those ones, again, I think all perfectly justifiable, especially like Little Miss Sunshine, Willy Wonka, because, those were just episodes based solely on those episodes. I know that there's some people which have a lot of problem with X-Men First Class because Darwin died, and like such as Tom because he literally can't be killed. But I don't think that's enough of a reason to just discount an entire film.
That's being a comic book nitpicker, and that is not enough for me.
So yeah, I'm happy with all of the remaining ones staying in there. Our bonus one, so this was a unique one because it wasn't one which we had a discussion about. This was one which was like a reward for winning one of our Endgame specials. So the one that I believe Di and Steph decided to go in was Phantom Thread after winning their Endgame special. So, Craig, what are your feelings on that?
Right. Here's why I think it's removed. A couple of reasons. One, it is a film that went in on bad faith. It went in specifically on the basis of they knew I hated the film. They very much were. They felt victimized by my end games to the point they wanted to punish me. The fact that Steph had a poster of Phantom Thread behind them, knowing that I hated the film, just to wind me up. They kept doing things they wanted to annoy me. I think it went in on bad faith. Two, the nature of the prizes of how we dealt with films after then sort of evolved to the point that we had to still discuss films and basically discuss the legacy, right? We discussed Little Miss Sunshine, we discussed The 50 Shades, we discussed Putty the Dog, the movie. So it just feels like an outlier for Phantom Thread to stay in the movie vault when all those other films that were people's favorite pieces of choices don't. This is why I am issuing you a challenge here, Steph and I, publicly on this podcast. So hopefully you're listening.
And maybe Dan and Joe, because they also were like,
and Dan and Joe, because also you are suck-ups and you also need to be dealt with. I'm challenging you all. If you object to the removal of Phantom Thread coming out of the movie vault, this is what is happening. You are coming on an episode of this show, and we are talking about Phantom Thread. Your one and only goal is this. David and I will be the only ones who decide if it goes in the movie vault based on the discussions that you bring against what we had problems with regards to that film. If you can convince us, we will put it back in. If you cannot, then screw you. It is going out and it is never being mentioned on the show again.
I think the bad faith thing as well is, again, it's like whether they can convince us like that their points are valid, but also if it can go in on good faith again, because we've had films that we don't like that have gone in, but we're putting them in there on good faith. So yeah, I think that that's a good point. And true that, the Endgame ones, we've talked about those films that people have then mentioned. So yeah. Sorry guys, I think we got the power here, but we're not saying we won't discuss it or have a chance for it to go in the future. So Phantom Thread, unfortunately, that is being disposed of for now. We'll see what that evolves to in the future. Okay, so that means that we do have our definitive list now, Craig, of the...
When you say definitive, we're adding more films to this list. That does not make it definitive.
For the start of the year. But going forward, I don't think we would ever go, oh, let's now take that out. So that's why I mean that, we won't ever change this again, like what comes before this. So we'll only ever add to it unless somebody wants to be pedantic and say, oh, well, you added Phantom Thread again. But again, it'll be added on its merits in that episode.
Yeah, but we're not removing any of these films from this point onwards.
No, exactly. So
these now have golden status.
Yeah, exactly. So for everyone at home, if you want to keep track, we'll refresh your mind about these as we go along now. As we're adding films to the vault, we'll have some announcements in terms of our episodes coming up in the future. So that will be a big element of, what is in this film vault? What do you want to see in there? So our movie vault list, which is what we're going into 2022 with and will only be added to. This is our ranking now after refreshing the list. So we have, and I'm doing this for my own sanity, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Jurassic Park, The Man Who Laughs, The Dark Knight, Batman, Mask of the Phantasm, Frankenstein, Creature from the Black Lagoon, Mary Poppins, Rocky Horror Picture Show, It's a Wonderful Life, Muppets Christmas Carol, Elf, Home Alone, Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek 2009,
Whiplash, Mad Max Fury Road, Wonder Woman, Black Panther, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Assemble, Avengers Age of Ultron, Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, Star Wars A New Hope, Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars Return of the Jedi, Star Wars Revenge of the Sith, Star Wars The Force Awakens, Man of Steel, Good Luck Chuck, The Invisible Man, Kung Fu Panda, How to Train Your Dragon,
Shrek, Shrek 2, The Prince of Egypt, Groundhog Day, Hot Fuzz, Joker, Sweeney Todd, Zootopia, Knives Out, Parasite, The Muppet Movie, The Muppets Take Manhattan, Muppet Treasure Island, Rent, Tron Legacy, Big Daddy, Happy Gilmore, and Eurovision The Story of Fire Saga.
X2, X-Men United, Human Traffic, Sunset Boulevard, Rafifi, Mulan, Animated, 101 Dalmatians, Live Action, The Great Dictator, The Kid, Trick or Treat, Volcano, Gosford Park, Gremlins, Edward Scissorhands, Trolls World Tour, Toy Story, The Shining, V for Vendetta, Gamera vs. Gaios, Mortal Kombat 1995.
And rounding it off, X-Men First Class, X-Men Days of Future Past, Little Miss Sunshine, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, Excalibur, GoldenEye, and Bridge on the River Kwai.
And a special guest appearance from Faye Dunaway, La La Land.
So yeah, that is the movie vault going into 2022, guys. Give us your thoughts on what you think of the films that are in there so far. Do you agree with anything? Do you disagree? What do you want to see discussed in the future? But as Craig said, nothing else would be sort of leaving the vault, but we have plenty more to sort of be considered to go back in. And we look forward to having lots more challenges and discussions, including potentially talking about Phantom Thread in the future.
We're in the end game now.
It's so annoying!
Okay, endgame time. Very simple one today. I just want to see how much you've understood the films of 2021. So this is just the big fat film quiz of the year 2021. Essentially, no big stress with this one. I've just found a quiz compiled by filmstories.co.uk, which is just a list of 21 questions about the films of this year. I just want to see how well you do.
Okay.
Okay? However, I'm going to add in a little caveat. Basically, there's no prize, necessarily. All there is, you avoid a punishment.
Right.
All right? So I want you to get 11 out of 21 at the very least, so you avoid a slap in the face. Well, we're in person again now. I can bring in physical punishments. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
There's no time limit. It's just how many of these questions you get.
Okay.
We'll start off nice and easy. Question 1. Whose director's cut of 2017's Justice League was released digitally in March?
Zack Snyder.
Correct. Question 2. Which film comes next in this sequence? Fargo, 3 Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri.
Fargo, 3 Boards Outside Missouri. Nomadland.
Correct. And why is that the sequence?
Is it because of the actress? The best winning,
Yes.
Oscar winning actress? Can't remember.
Who is?
Her name has escaped me for some reason right now. I can't remember her name.
Frances McDormand.
That's it, yeah.
I mean, I'm tempted to take the point off just because you had no idea. Question 3. The third Conjuring film was released in May. What's its full title?
Is it The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It?
Correct. Your face is looking very soft right now. Number 4. Which US city shared its name with a time loop rom-com starring Andy Samberg and Kristen Milioti?
Spring Break?
Nope, the answer is Palm Springs.
Springs, yeah.
Spring Break, famously not a city in America.
I was like, I know it's something to do with like summer and stuff, but...
Number 5. Who connects the 2021 films Dune and The French Dispatch, both released in UK cinemas on the same day in October?
Timothy Chalamet.
Correct. Number 6. Complete the title of the Netflix original animated film, The Mitchells vs.
The Machines.
Correct. Number 7. What decade connects The Courier, Judas and the Black Messiah, and Last Night in Soho?
Korea. I know it's something about like Cold War, so 1989? No.
The decade.
Oh. I don't know whether to use this chance to reconsider my answer, actually. 70s.
60s.
Ah, okay.
Number 8. In Freaky, which comic actor plays the serial killer who swaps bodies with Catherine Newton's high schooler?
Sorry, repeat the question.
In Freaky, which comic actor plays the serial killer who swaps bodies with Catherine Newton's high schooler?
Vince Vaughn.
Correct. Number 9. Which musical features the songs Breathe, 96,000 and Carnival del Barrio?
In the Heights.
Correct. Number 10. Which British comedian and actor plays ill-fated scientist Dr. Hardy in the James Bond film No Time to Die?
Oh, it is... Who was it? I was like, oh my god, they're in this. Oh. God damn it. Was it Hugh Dennis?
Hugh Dennis.
Yeah.
Number 11. Hello, Cruel World is the tagline for which Disney film?
Cruella?
Correct. Number 12. Which director reunited with Tom Hanks for the Western drama News of the World released on Netflix in February?
Paul Greengrass?
Correct. One more and you're safe. Which crime thriller spin-off was billed as From the Book of Saul?
Oh, what was the name of that?
That is the question I just asked you.
I can't remember. Pass.
Spiral.
That's it. I knew it was just something completely different to Saw, but...
Number 14. Which 2009 film topped the list of the all-time highest grossing movies at the worldwide box office for a second time in March this year?
Avatar.
Correct. And that means you are safe.
Yeah.
Number 15. Space Jam: A New Legacy features characters from It, A Clockwork Orange, and The Devils, but which Looney Tunes character was cut out due to his problematic personality?
Oh, I'm trying to think of his name now. It's Pepe. No.
I need his full name.
Yeah. Pepe Le Pew.
Yep, it's Pepe Le Pew. Number 16. Complete the title of the Prime Video musical adaptation Everybody's Talking About.
Jamie.
Yeah. The fact it took you that long sickens me. Which Netflix horror trilogy connects the years 1994, 1978, and 1666?
Netflix horror trilogy. No idea. Pass.
Fear Street.
Never heard of it.
Ridley Scott had 2 films out in 2021, but which has performed better at the worldwide box office?
House of Gucci.
Yeah, I didn't even need to give you the options. Bonus point, because why not? What is the reason given for why that's the case?
It has Lady Gaga.
No, it's about Ridley Scott's connection to why he said Last Duel did so badly, which was millennials.
Millenniums, or whatever it was.
Millennians.
Yeah, that's
it. Specifically put here.
Yeah, that's where he said it.
Number 19. Which country promises Gerard Butler and his family sanctuary from a planet-killing comet in the disaster thriller of the same name?
Yeah, I can't remember. I remember this film coming out, but I don't know. Belgium.
Greenland. Number 20. Lucky, Podcast, and Trevor are all characters in which 1980s franchise sequel?
Ghostbusters Afterlife.
Yep. Number 21. Which axe-wielding Film Stories magazine cover star connects the 2021 films in the Earth and Venom: Let There Be Carnage?
Say it again. Sorry, the first bit.
Which axe-wielding Film Stories magazine cover star, so I'm guessing that's something specific to them, connects the 2021 films In the Earth and Venom Let There Be Carnage.
I'm just gonna say Woody Harrelson, but I have a feeling it might be the actress who plays like his love interest in that film.
Do you happen to know her name?
Naomi Watts or something?
Reese Shearsmith.
Ah, right, okay.
Cool. So at the end of that, you got 15 out of 21.
Awesome.
There was also a bonus round, but I can't be asked to give you that. So yeah, so congratulations, David. You are safe. Whether or not that plays out for the rest of this year, we will see.
I just done a clap sound effect if it was. But
Oh, I was going to do the gong.
So yeah, well, yeah, great way to round off 2021 there, and glad I held up, especially after some poor performances in Endgames recently, the last few times I've done them. Yeah, so now we just round things off by talking about what is to come in 2022. And Craig, I think it's kind of evident there from that conversation we are having about the movie Vault about why, we're just changing things up, and we'll go into more detail in like the end of our next episode. But Hugh, can you just sort of give a bit of context as to why we're maybe going to be having some changes on Well Good Movies, and we're going to have a bit of a new format and new ways that, our listeners can sort of interact with the episodes and guests, etc.
Well, very much the way that we've sort of evolved towards the end of this year is very much wanting to look specifically at films and just give them their due, give them the spotlight, regardless of sort of the perceived quality of them. However, the way that we've sort of been restricted by this is by trying to get things which are thematically relevant to things going through the year. And we found that that's quite a restrictive way of wanting to do things in terms of both, getting people who actually want to be talking about it and engage in it, but also just not fully engaging the listeners as well. We think that it would actually be nice for you to have some degree of hype about what's going to be coming up. So the way we're going to be adapting the format, which will be illustrated exactly how we do this, is very much we will be giving you more of information towards the end of each episode about what will actually be coming up in the future episodes, and just giving them their dues. There might be bonuses along the way that sort of intersperse that, as we always try to have like some bonuses where we feel they're relevant, but very much we want there to be a sort of hype around when the episodes are actually released, as opposed to just randomly, what are these guys potentially going to talk about this week? We very much want there to be sort of a buzz about it.
Yeah, and like we said previously, there's not going to be that element of like we're taking this broad topic, because as we said as well, the way things have changed in terms of like availability and the way that we work now, it's very hard to just cover an entire franchise, especially when you want to keep it to sort of that like 90 minutes to 2 hours. It's like you said, it's giving those films their dues. It's like you can be too broad in talking about these bigger topics, and I think the elements that we've enjoyed most is like, what goes into the movie, or why does this film deserve to go in there? And by going through the list there, I think it was evident that we were happy with everything that's gone in within the past few episodes, because they had those dedicated episodes and they had their dues in terms of that discussion. And it makes for a more exciting list, I think. So hopefully those films that we discussed, like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, etc., hopefully they can have their dues as Mary Poppins did, in the sense that they are discussed more broadly in the future. And I think that our new format and stuff will allow for that, and it also will be a great way for the audience at home to kind of watch along with us. It'll be a great sort of experience, I think, for everyone. We got like some really exciting, fun ideas in which people can kind of watch along with us, whereas before, like you said, you didn't know what was coming up, or it might just be times that people have said, well, I've never watched that film before, or I've not heard of this. Well, now there's going to be an element of like, well, watch along with us and discuss with us. It's going to be really great. We can't wait to sort of tell you more about that. There'll be more details in the next episode, and we'll have some more like promotional material and stuff coming out for it. So we look forward to telling you all about that. Craig, once again, you are given the task of teasing the next episode, especially as it is still linked to that Endgame, as you've been teasing for the past few weeks.
Yeah, so very much, this is it. This is finally, we're going to be seeing the prize that the winning team of the Champions Cut of the Endgame specials will be putting us through. So it'll be the first episode where David and I will not be hosting, but very much the guests, we imagine. And instead, Alex McCready and Ed Mason will be taking the reins and putting us through our paces in terms of what we actually talk about. But very much the conversation will be on the grounds that they want it, as opposed to, the way that we usually do it, which is just we pose questions. We will be the ones answering questions. And then also there will be some form of endgame, which David and I for another time, we'll go for head-to-head. Currently, the scores are, the first time was draw, the second time I won. So let's see if David can get a point off me for a change.
And then even if you think of like the times we were on the Dan and Joe film show, I think both times
I still won, yeah.
You won all those as well.
Oh yeah, because like David's brilliant strategy for, is it a man? No. Is it a woman? Yes.
That's classic. We were watching Weakest Link yesterday. That's classic kind of quiz show fumbles. Like, why did I think that?
Yeah.
Why did that pop in my head? So yeah, I've definitely got something to prove in this next one, and yeah, it'll be a great start to the year. We hope to have a lot of exciting new guests. We hope to have a lot of people come back, some of our regulars, some of our favorite people to talk to, everyone you've seen within the past 2.5 years. We do, please, reach out to us if you've got a film you want to discuss. If there's one that that's coming up, then please do tell us about it. We are happy for anybody who's ever joined us before to come back, and we're happy for lots of new guests to join us as well. So we can't wait to share all of that. And yeah, it's going to be some really fun times coming up ahead, guys. Lots of new exciting stuff, and we hope you are there along for the ride. We very much see this as the level up now. We sort of built our community, built our audience and everything like that. We got people who listen in America, in the UK, and we'll be putting a lot more out on our socials and a lot more interaction with the episodes. So please do, like I said, reach out to us, tell us what you would like to see discussed in the movie vault. What are your thoughts on what's already in there, what we're discussing? We can't wait to sort of bring all these new ideas to you, and a great way to do that is also we got a lot of stuff that we'll be bringing up in the next year or so. But currently a good way to sort of interact is if you listen on Spotify, they've now brought in interactable questions on there. So if you go onto the Spotify app or on the player, I've always then added a question. So this week's question will be, what film do you want us to see discuss to go into the movie vault in the future? So if you look at previous episodes, some of the questions I think have been added as what was your favorite Bond film? What Boxing Day movie do you always watch? So that's a great way to support us and sort of interact with us. Other great ways, give us a review on Apple or iTunes, etc. if you listen through Apple Podcasts. And as usual, just subscribe, follow, like all the socials if you can. So yeah, the usual. You can find us on Twitter, Instagram and Facebook at Well Good Movies. You can catch us over on our website, which is freshtakehub.com, which has lots of fun stuff over on there as well in terms of written content and video content. You can also find all of our previous episodes on there if you want to go back and listen to discussions we've had about the films we've been talking about today, or if you want to catch up on the last few that we've done recently, such as Bond and the Boxing Day special. And yeah, please do, like I said, follow us, like all our stuff, and recommend us to your friends. If you've got big movie buff friends out there, then this is the podcast that they want to be listening to, especially as people are going back to work, and if you want something crazy and fun to put on in the background. Is there anything lastly from yourself, Craig?
Just simply to say happy 2022.
Yeah.
For the love of God, let this one be better.
Craig is not talking about the year, he's just talking about the quality of films that he'll have to endure during this time.
I mean, that too, sure.
So yeah, thank you once again for joining us, guys. We've had a great time, just two of us talking to you, and we look forward to coming back with some exciting guests and some exciting challenges. So see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
So those are good. We then went and talked
Pause.
about...
The standing was not actually working.
I've changed my mind.